The sun shone brightly over Oakwood Park that Tuesday afternoon. Michael Davis, a 34-year-old software engineer, had chosen the perfect spot under a maple tree to enjoy his lunch after his morning jog. He'd been living in the Westwood neighborhood for almost 3 years now, though he still felt like something of a newcomer compared to families who'd been there for generations. Michael unwrapped his sandwich from Celia's Deli, turkey on sourdough with extra pickles, his weekly treat, and took a deep breath of the fresh spring air. His workout had been particularly good today, 5 miles at his target pace, and the sandwich was his well-earned reward. He scrolled through work emails on his phone as he ate, occasionally glancing up to watch a group of kids playing frisbee on the open grass. It was a peaceful scene, the kind that had drawn him to this neighborhood in the first place. Good parks, quiet streets, and a sense of community he hadn't found in his downtown apartment. The police cruiser pulled up to the park entrance so quietly that Michael didn't notice it at first. Officer James Reynolds sat in the driver's seat for nearly a minute, observing the park before stepping out. He adjusted his belt and cap before walking with measured steps toward the shaded area where Michael sat. Reynolds was a 12-year veteran of the Westfield Police Department. His record showed a mix of commendations and complaints, the latter mostly filed away without action. He'd patrolled this neighborhood for the past 5 years and considered himself something of a guardian for the area's traditional character, as he often put it to his fellow officers. "Afternoon," Reynolds said, standing over Michael with his thumbs hooked in his belt. His voice carried a sharpness that immediately made Michael look up from his phone. "Good afternoon, officer," Michael replied with a nod, setting his phone down. He'd learned from his father long ago, when police approach, be polite, move slowly, keep your hands visible. "Got a call about someone suspicious in the park," Reynolds said, making no effort to soften his tone. "What are you doing here?" Michael blinked, momentarily confused. The park was public, half full of people enjoying their lunch breaks. "Just having lunch after my run, sir," he answered, gesturing to his sandwich and the water bottle beside him. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. "You live around here?" "Yes, on Maple Drive, about 3 blocks that way." Michael pointed east. "Been there almost 3 years now." Reynolds scanned Michael from head to toe, lingering on his expensive running shoes and the smartwatch on his wrist. "Uh-huh, got some ID on you?" Michael felt a familiar knot form in his stomach, the same tension he'd experienced too many times before. He was dressed in regular running clothes, black shorts, a gray moisture-wicking shirt, nothing unusual. Nothing that should make him suspicious in a public park at lunchtime. Nothing except the color of his skin. "I'm just out for a jog and lunch, officer. I didn't bring my wallet," Michael explained calmly, "but I can show you my phone. It has my address and the emergency contact information." Reynolds stepped closer, his shadow falling across Michael's food. "Convenient, isn't it? No ID." Michael kept his voice steady. "I don't typically carry my wallet when I'm running, officer. I can give you my address and you can verify I live there. Or we could walk over, it's just a few blocks." A young woman walking her dog slowed down nearby, watching the interaction with concern. Michael noticed her but kept his focus on Reynolds, whose face had hardened. "We've had break-ins in this neighborhood," Reynolds said. "Nice houses, nice cars. Things going missing." "I'm sorry to hear that," Michael replied. "But I'm just having lunch in the park." Reynolds looked down at the half-eaten sandwich. "And what brings you to this particular park?" "There are parks downtown." The implication was clear enough that even the dog walker, now pretending to check her phone while standing within earshot, shook her head slightly. "I live near here," Michael repeated, his patience straining but his voice remaining level. "I've been coming to this park since I moved to the neighborhood." "This neighborhood," Reynolds echoed, emphasizing each word. "And how exactly did you end up here?" Michael took a deep breath. "I work at TechSphere, software engineering team. I bought my house 3 years ago when I got promoted to lead developer." Something flashed across Reynolds' face, disbelief perhaps, or something darker. "TechSphere, huh? Big shot. So where's your fancy car then?" "Don't see any Teslas parked nearby." "I jogged here, officer. That's why I'm in running clothes." A small group of people had gathered near the path now, watching the interaction. Among them was Greg Chen, another regular at the park who recognized Michael from weekend mornings when they both did their runs. Greg stepped a little closer, making it clear he was paying attention. Reynolds noticed the growing audience but seemed undeterred. If anything, he stiffened further. "Stand up," he ordered. Michael carefully set his sandwich down on its wrapper. "May I ask why, officer?" "Stand up when I'm talking to you," Reynolds repeated, one hand moving to rest on his belt near his taser. Michael slowly rose to his feet, keeping his movements deliberate and his hands visible. At 6'1", he stood slightly taller than Reynolds, which seemed to irritate the officer even more. "Turn out your pockets." "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong," Michael said. "I'm just having lunch in a public park." "You match a description," Reynolds insisted, though he hadn't mentioned any description before this moment. "Turn out your pockets now." Michael slowly complied, pulling the lining of his shorts pockets out to reveal only his house key on a small ring and a few dollars. Greg Chen had taken out his phone and was clearly recording now, as were two others in the small crowd that had gathered. Reynolds noticed but didn't stop. "What's in the bag?" Reynolds pointed to Michael's small running pouch on the ground. "Just my water bottle, phone, and house key when I'm running," Michael answered, reaching down slowly to pick it up. "Don't move," Reynolds barked, his hand now fully on his taser. Michael froze, hands raised slightly. "Officer, this is unnecessary. You people always think you can just move in anywhere, don't you?" Reynolds cut him off, his voice dropping lower but intensity increasing. "Think you can change the rules, take over places that aren't meant for you?" The naked prejudice in his words hung in the air. A few gasps came from the onlookers. Greg stepped forward. "Hey, I know this guy," Greg called out. "He lives around the corner. He's here all the time." Reynolds barely glanced at Greg. "Stay back. This is police business." "It looks like harassment to me," someone in the small crowd muttered, loud enough to be heard. Reynolds' face flushed red. He turned back to Michael, who remained calm despite his heart pounding in his chest. "Officer," Michael said quietly, "I understand you're doing your job, but I'm just a resident enjoying the park. There's no problem here." "You're the problem," Reynolds snapped, stepping forward suddenly. His boot caught the edge of Michael's lunch, and with a sweep of his arm, too deliberate to be accidental, he knocked the sandwich, chips, and drink onto the grass. "Oops, looks like you're littering now too." Food scattered across the ground. Michael's lunch was ruined, sauce and pickle slices staining the grass. But it wasn't the waste of food that made the crowd gasp. It was the unmistakable intent behind the action. "That was completely unnecessary," Michael said, his composure finally showing cracks as he looked down at his ruined lunch. "Clean it up," Reynolds ordered, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "This park has rules about littering." Before Michael could respond, Greg stepped fully into the scene, his phone still recording. "That's enough. We all saw what you did, officer. That was deliberate and unprofessional." Other phones were raised now, at least 5 people recording the confrontation. A woman in a business suit stepped forward. "I'm calling the station," she announced. "I have Chief Wilkins' direct number. This is unacceptable." Reynolds seemed to suddenly register how many witnesses surrounded him, how many cameras were capturing his behavior. His expression shifted, the smugness replaced by something more guarded. "Just doing my job," he muttered, then pointed at Michael. "Don't leave town. We're not finished here." With that weak attempt to save face, Reynolds turned and walked back toward his cruiser, his posture stiff and defensive. The moment he was out of earshot, several park-goers approached Michael. "I got that all on video," Greg said, stopping his recording and coming over. "That was straight-up harassment." "You okay?" Michael nodded slowly, looking down at his ruined lunch while processing what had just happened. Yeah, I'm okay." "I'm Diane Lewis," the woman in the business suit said, extending her hand. "I'm on the community council. I've already texted Chief Wilkins. He'll want to see these videos." "Thank you," Michael said, shaking her hand. "I appreciate that." As the group helped Michael clean up the mess Reynolds had made, phone numbers were exchanged, and promises to send video evidence were made. What Reynolds hadn't counted on was that Oakwood Park wasn't just any park. It was the heart of a community that, despite its problems, was better than what he'd just displayed. Michael looked toward the parking lot where Reynolds' cruiser was pulling away. This wasn't the first time he'd faced prejudice, and he doubted it would be the last. But as he looked around at the neighbors rallying to support him, people of different backgrounds and ages all equally disgusted by what they'd witnessed, he fell. Michael Davis sat in his car outside the Westfield Police Department, gathering his thoughts. 2 hours had passed since the incident at Oakwood Park, but his hand still trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. He'd gone home first, changed out of his running clothes, and tried to process what had happened. The humiliation of having his lunch thrown to the ground played over in his mind. But it was Officer Reynolds' words that cut deeper, the unmistakable prejudice behind them. His phone buzzed with another notification. The video Greg Chen had taken was spreading across local social media groups. 3 other witnesses had already sent their recordings to Michael via text. Diane Lewis from the Community Council had called twice, updating him on her conversation with Chief Wilkins. "You need to file a formal complaint," she'd insisted. "I've known Thomas Wilkins for 15 years. He won't sweep this under the rug, but you need to make it official." Michael took a deep breath and stepped out of his car. The police station was a modern 2-story building with large glass doors at the entrance. As a taxpayer, he had every right to be there, to be heard, to demand accountability. Still, walking through those doors required courage he wished he didn't need. Inside, the lobby was brightly lit and surprisingly busy for a weekday afternoon. Michael approached the front desk where Officer Lisa Rodriguez was handling paperwork. She looked up as he approached. "Good afternoon, how can I help you?" she asked. "I'd like to file a formal complaint about an officer," Michael said, his voice steadier than he expected. Officer Rodriguez nodded without surprise or defensiveness. "Of course, sir. May I ask what this is regarding?" "An incident that happened about 2 hours ago at Oakwood Park. Officer James Reynolds approached me while I was having lunch, harassed me, and deliberately destroyed my food." Recognition flickered across Rodriguez's face. "Mr. Davis?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "Yes, how did you know?" "Chief Wilkins is expecting you," she said, reaching for the phone. "Diane Lewis from the Community Council called him directly. He asked to be notified when you arrived." While Rodriguez made the call, Michael noticed a few officers glancing his way from across the lobby. News traveled fast in a department this size. He wondered how many already knew about the incident, how many had already seen the videos. A door opened, and Chief Thomas Wilkins appeared. In his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair, and the build of someone who still maintained the physical standards he expected from his officers, Wilkins had a reputation for running a tight ship. He approached Michael with a serious expression. "Mr. Davis, I'm Chief Wilkins. Would you come with me, please?" Michael followed him through secure doors and down a hallway to a conference room rather than an interrogation room. A small but meaningful distinction. "Please. Have a seat," Wilkins said, gesturing to a chair. "Would you like some water?" "Yes, thank you." As Wilkins poured water from a pitcher, he spoke in a measured tone. "I've already seen 2 videos of the incident at the park. Ms. Lewis forwarded them to me immediately. Before we get to your formal statement, I want you to know that what I saw does not reflect the standards of this department." Michael took a sip of water. "With all due respect, Chief Wilkins, it was your officer in uniform who did this." Wilkins nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Yes, it was. And I'm not here to make excuses for him. What I saw was unacceptable." He placed a form on the table. "This is our official complaint form. I'd like you to fill it out in detail. Take as much time as you need. I've also arranged for you to give a recorded statement once you're ready." Michael pulled the form closer. "What happens after I file this?" "Officer Reynolds has already been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That happened within 30 minutes of my viewing the videos. The investigation will be thorough and transparent. And if the investigation confirms what's clearly shown in the videos," Wilkins met Michael's gaze directly, "then appropriate action will be taken. I don't prejudge investigations, Mr. Davis, but I also don't ignore evidence." As Michael began filling out the form, there was a knock at the door. A woman in a suit entered carrying a tablet. "This is Lieutenant Gloria Washington from Internal Affairs," Wilkins explained. "She'll be overseeing the investigation." Washington nodded to Michael. "Mr. Davis, I've reviewed the videos that were submitted so far. I understand there may be more footage from other witnesses?" "Yes," Michael said. "I've received videos from 3 other people who were at the park. With your permission, I'd like to get copies of those," Washington said, taking a seat. "Also, we'll need a detailed statement from you about what happened before the recording started." For the next hour, Michael carefully documented everything, from the moment Reynolds approached him to the final threat as the officer left. Washington asked clarifying questions without ever suggesting Michael might be exaggerating or misinterpreting what had happened. Her professionalism helped calm the lingering anxiety he felt. "Did Officer Reynolds mention receiving a call about someone suspicious?" Washington asked. "Yes, that's how he justified approaching me initially." Washington made a note. "We've checked the dispatch logs. There was no such call." The implication hung in the air. Reynolds had lied about his reason for confronting Michael. As Michael finished his statement, his phone buzzed with a text from Greg Chen. "Channel 7 just contacted me about the video. They want to run it on the evening news. You okay with that?" Michael showed the text to Chief Wilkins. "This is already becoming a media story." Wilkins sighed. "I expected it would. These things move quickly nowadays." He thought for a moment. "Our department has nothing to hide here, Mr. Davis. If you choose to speak to the media, that's your right. All I ask is that you mention we've launched a full investigation and that Officer Reynolds is on administrative leave. You're not going to ask me to keep quiet for the sake of the department?" Wilkins shook his head. "No, sir. What happened to you was wrong. Trying to silence you would only compound that wrong." As they wrapped up the paperwork, Michael felt emotionally drained but also strangely empowered. The system was responding. Not perfectly, perhaps, but responding nonetheless. Outside the station, Michael found his car surrounded by a small group of people. For a moment he tensed, but then recognized Greg Chen among them, along with two other witnesses from the park. Diane Lewis stood at the center, clipboard in hand. "Michael," she called out as he approached. "How did it go?" "Better than I expected," he admitted. "Reynolds is on leave." "They're investigating." Greg stepped forward. "That's something at least. But we wanted to do more." He gestured to the group. "These are all neighbors who either witnessed what happened or saw the videos. We've started a petition demanding accountability." Diane held up her clipboard. 68 signatures already, and we've only been at it for an hour." An older man Michael didn't recognize stepped forward. "I've lived in Westwood for 40 years. What that officer did doesn't represent our community." Michael was touched by the show of support, but also wary. "I appreciate this, but I don't want to turn this into some kind of neighborhood crusade." "It's not just about you," Diane explained gently. "Though what happened to you was terrible. It's about making sure our police department serves everyone equally. If Officer Reynolds has done this to you, he's likely done it to others. Or will do it in the future," added a young woman standing nearby. Michael considered this perspective. His instinct had been to handle this quietly, to file the complaint and hope for justice. But perhaps there was a bigger picture here, a responsibility that extended beyond his individual experience. As if reading his thoughts, Greg said, "The news is going to run the story with or without your input. At least if you speak up, you can control your part of the narrative." By the time Michael got home that evening, the story had indeed broken. His phone was filled with messages from friends who had seen the video, from colleagues offering support, and from local community organizations asking if he needed assistance. He sat on his couch, watching as the local news anchor described the incident. Disturbing footage from Oakwood Park today shows what appears to be a clear case of racial profiling by a Westfield police officer. The screen showed a carefully edited version of Greg's video, with Michael's face blurred at his request. The sandwich falling to the ground played in slow motion, making Reynolds' intentional action unmistakable. The report continued. The officer, identified as James Reynolds, has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The police department has confirmed they are treating this matter with the utmost seriousness. Michael's phone rang. It was his mother calling from Cleveland. "I just saw the news," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," he assured her, though fine wasn't exactly accurate. "Just dealing with it one step at a time. You know your father faced the same thing 30 years ago," she said quietly. "Some things change so slowly. But they do change," Michael replied, thinking of Chief Wilkins' straightforward response, of the neighbors who had stood with him. "The officer is on leave. There's an investigation. People are speaking up. Be careful," his mother cautioned. "These situations can get complicated." After they hung up, Michael stepped out onto his porch. The evening was peaceful, his street quiet. "A neighbor across the way, Wuv." The Westfield Police Department headquarters buzzed with unusual activity the morning after the incident. Lieutenant Gloria Washington sat in a small conference room, her desk covered with printed reports, witness statements, and a laptop displaying freeze frames from the various videos. She'd arrived at 6 in the morning, determined to conduct a thorough investigation that would withstand any scrutiny. Outside her window, a small group of protesters had already gathered, carrying signs demanding justice and accountability. The local news van was parked across the street, a reporter doing live updates for the morning broadcast. Washington sipped her coffee and turned her attention to Officer James Reynolds' personnel file. 12 years on the force, multiple commendations for bravery, but also a pattern that was becoming increasingly clear as she dug deeper, a pattern most of her predecessors had failed to address. A knock at the door interrupted her review. Chief Wilkins entered, looking like he hadn't slept much. "Morning, Gloria. How's it coming?" Washington gestured to the stack of papers. "I've found 7 previous complaints against Reynolds that were dismissed without proper investigation. All of them involved allegations of racial bias or excessive force against minorities." Wilkins frowned. 7? The official record only shows 3. That's because 4 were classified as citizen comments rather than formal complaints. They never made it into his official record. She handed him a folder. These should have been red flags years ago. Wilkins looked through the documents, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "This happened under my watch. Some of these go back to before your time as chief," Washington pointed out. "Doesn't matter. I've been here 5 years. That's plenty of time to have spotted this pattern." He set the folder down. "What about the park incident itself?" Washington turned her laptop around. "It's worse than the viral video shows. The park has security cameras that captured the entire interaction. There was no call about a suspicious person. Reynolds made that up. He targeted Mr. Davis deliberately. She played the footage, which showed Reynolds sitting in his cruiser, watching Michael for several minutes before approaching him. And there's more," Washington continued. "I pulled Reynolds' text messages from his department phone." She hesitated. "Chief, they're not good. Racist language. Comments about cleaning up certain neighborhoods. He was texting with another officer right before he approached Mr. Davis." Wilkins' jaw tightened. "Who?" "Officer Patrick Miller. I want him in my office this afternoon." Wilkins stood up. "I need your preliminary report by noon. The mayor's called twice already and the county commissioner wants answers." "You'll have it," Washington promised. "And Chief?" "Based on what I've found so far, I'm going to recommend termination." Wilkins nodded grimly. "If your evidence supports it, I'll back you 100%. Across town, Michael Davis sat in his living room with Greg Chen and Diane Lewis. His coffee table was covered with printouts of emails and social media messages. Hundreds of people expressing support, sharing similar experiences, offering legal assistance. "The response has been overwhelming," Diane said, scrolling through more messages on her tablet. "People from all over the county are reaching out." "I never wanted to become the center of some movement," Michael admitted. "I just wanted to eat my lunch in peace." Greg placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes these moments choose us, not the other way around." He gestured to the television, which was showing footage of the protest outside the police station. "Those people were already frustrated. Your experience just gave them something concrete to rally around." Michael's phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Davis, this is Anthony Richardson from the Civil Rights Division of the State Attorney's Office. Do you have a moment to talk?" Michael straightened. "Yes, of course. We've been monitoring the situation in Westfield. I've reviewed the videos and spoken with Lieutenant Washington this morning. I wanted you to know that our office is opening an independent investigation into Officer Reynolds and potentially into broader patterns within the Westfield PD." "I appreciate that," Michael said, putting the call on speaker so Greg and Diane could hear. "We'd like to meet with you tomorrow if possible," Richardson continued. "Your experience may be part of a larger pattern we've been tracking." After arranging the meeting and ending the call, Michael looked at his friends. "This is getting bigger than I expected." "Good," Diane said firmly. "The system only changes when enough pressure is applied." Back at the police station, Officer Patrick Miller sat nervously in a small interview room. Across from him, Lieutenant Washington reviewed text messages on her tablet. "You texted Officer Reynolds at 12:43 p.m. yesterday," she said without looking up. "Black guy in running clothes at the park again. Then at 12:45, probably casing houses like the others. Care to explain?" Miller shifted uncomfortably. It was just an observation. An observation based on what evidence? We've had break-ins in that neighborhood. Yes, we have, Washington agreed. 3 in the past 6 months. All 3 suspects were identified and arrested. None matched Mr. Davis's description. None were black men. Miller had no response. Let me be clear, Washington continued. This investigation is focused on Officer Reynolds right now, but it could easily expand. I suggest you think carefully about your next steps. By noon, Washington delivered her preliminary report to Chief Wilkins as promised. The evidence was damning. The security footage showing Reynolds targeting Michael without provocation, the fabricated claim about a suspicious person call, the text messages revealing bias, and the pattern of previous complaints that had been ignored. Wilkins read through it twice, each detail more disturbing than the last. He'd prided himself on running a professional department, on building community trust. How had he missed this? He picked up his phone. Rachel, arrange a meeting with the mayor and the city attorney for 3 o'clock. And contact Mr. Davis. I'd like him to come in tomorrow morning. At his desk, Wilkins opened his laptop and began drafting a statement. This wouldn't be handled with the usual bureaucratic caution. The evidence was too clear, the offense too serious, the pattern too established. By mid-afternoon, news vans from 3 stations were parked outside the police headquarters. The protest had grown to about 50 people, including several community leaders and 2 city council members. Inside, Wilkins met with Mayor Howard and City Attorney Patricia Clark. The discussion was tense but focused. The evidence is overwhelming, Wilkins explained, showing them the security footage and the text messages. Reynolds targeted Mr. Davis because of his race, lied about his reasons for the confrontation, and deliberately escalated the situation. What about a suspension pending a more thorough investigation? Mayor Howard suggested. That's the usual procedure. With respect, Mayor, this isn't a usual case, Wilkins countered. Reynolds has a pattern of similar behavior that's been overlooked for years. I'm recommending immediate termination. Clark, the city attorney, removed her glasses. From a legal perspective, I believe termination is justified based on the evidence. The text messages alone demonstrate clear racial bias in performing his duties. The mayor looked between them. The police union will fight this. Let them, Wilkins said firmly. I can defend this decision to anyone. After the meeting, Wilkins called Reynolds and ordered him to turn in his badge and gun by the end of the day. The formal termination paperwork would follow. You can't do this, Reynolds protested. I have rights. The union will get their due process, Wilkins cut him off. But you're no longer employed by this department. The evidence against you is overwhelming. At 6 o'clock that evening, Chief Wilkins stood before a forest of microphones in the station's briefing room. Cameras flashed as he began his statement. Yesterday, an incident occurred at Oakwood Park that violated the trust between our department and the community we serve. After a thorough preliminary investigation, I have terminated Officer James Reynolds, effective immediately. A murmur ran through the room. The investigation revealed that Officer Reynolds targeted a citizen because of his race, fabricated the justification for the encounter, and deliberately escalated the situation. Furthermore, our investigation uncovered evidence of a pattern of similar behavior that was not properly addressed in the past. Wilkins paused, taking responsibility for the institutional failure. As Chief of Police, I accept that our systems for handling complaints and identifying problematic behavior were inadequate. That changes today. He outlined immediate reforms, a civilian review board with actual authority, mandatory body cameras with strict compliance requirements, and a comprehensive review of all previous complaints against officers. I've spoken with Mr. Michael Davis, the citizen who was targeted yesterday, and personally apologized for the treatment he received. Tomorrow I will meet with him to discuss how we can work together to rebuild trust. As the press conference ended, Michael watched from his living room, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had come to offer support. He actually did it, Greg said, sounding surprised. He fired him the same day. It's a start, Michael replied. But it's just one officer. Diane nodded thoughtfully. True change is slower. But this is something. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Washington. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of Chief Wilkins' office as he welcomed Michael Davis for their scheduled meeting. 3 days had passed since the incident at Oakwood Park, and the story had only grown larger. National news outlets had picked it up. Social media was buzzing with millions of views of the video, and the small protest outside the police station had swelled to hundreds of people, demanding broader reforms. "Thank you for coming in." "Mr. Davis," Wilkins said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Lieutenant Washington sat nearby, a folder of documents in her lap. "I appreciate you making the time," Michael replied, settling into the chair. He'd dressed formally for the occasion, charcoal suit, blue tie, polished shoes. Not his usual work attire, but this didn't feel like an ordinary meeting. "I want to start by saying again how deeply sorry I am for what happened," Wilkins began. "Officer Reynolds' behavior was inexcusable, and his termination was just the first step in addressing this situation." Michael nodded. "I appreciate the swift action. Many people were surprised by how quickly the decision was made." "The evidence was clear," Washington interjected. "We didn't need weeks of investigation to see what happened. But there's more to discuss beyond just Reynolds' firing." She opened her folder and placed several documents on the desk. "We've completed our review of Officer Reynolds' history with the department. We found 11 incidents over his 12-year career that show a pattern of biased policing. 7 involved black citizens, 3 involved Latino citizens, and 1 involved a Middle Eastern family." Michael leaned forward to look at the documents. "And none of these led to any disciplinary action?" "Minor reprimands at most," Washington confirmed. "The system failed repeatedly. Complaints were minimized, witnesses weren't properly interviewed, and Reynolds' fellow officers often provided statements that contradicted civilian accounts." "This is why I asked you here today," Wilkins said. "We're not just addressing one officer's actions. We're confronting a systemic problem that allowed those actions to continue unchecked for years." Michael studied the chief's face, looking for signs of the usual bureaucratic damage control. Instead, he saw what appeared to be genuine regret and determination. "What exactly are you proposing?" Michael asked. Wilkins slid a document across the desk. "A comprehensive reform plan. I've already presented it to the mayor and city council. It includes establishing a civilian oversight board with real authority, mandatory body cameras with strict compliance requirements, and a complete overhaul of our complaint investigation process." Michael skimmed the document. The proposals were substantial, far beyond the typical promises made after incidents like this. "The mayor supports this?" "He doesn't have much choice," Wilkins said with a slight smile. "The public pressure is intense, and frankly it should be. We failed in our duty to treat all citizens equally." Washington leaned forward. "There's something else, Mr. Davis. The state attorney's Civil Rights Division is expanding their investigation to look at our entire department. They've asked if you would be willing to serve as a community liaison for the process." Michael hadn't expected this. "Why me?" "Your experience sparked this reckoning," Washington explained. "But more importantly, you've handled it with remarkable composure. You haven't called for revenge or made inflammatory statements. You've consistently pushed for accountability and reform. We need voices like yours at the table," Wilkins added. "People who want real change but understand that rebuilding trust takes time and genuine effort from both sides." Michael thought about it. When he'd sat down for lunch at the park just 3 days ago, he could never have imagined being in this position. He was a software engineer, not an activist. Yet here he was, being asked to help reshape the police department that had humiliated him. "I'll need time to think about it," he finally said. "Of course," Wilkins nodded. "This isn't a decision to make lightly." As the meeting concluded, Lieutenant Washington walked Michael out. In the lobby, a group of officers stopped their conversations and watched as they passed. Michael felt their eyes on him, some curious, some wary, a few openly hostile. "Not everyone is on board with the changes," Washington said quietly as they reached the door. "Change is hard, especially for institutions like this." "I understand that," Michael replied. "But sometimes necessary things are hard." Outside, Michael found Greg Chen waiting for him. They walked together toward the coffee shop across the street, away from the small group of protesters and media still camped outside the station. "How did it go?" Greg asked once they were seated with their drinks. Michael recounted the meeting, showing Greg the reform proposal. "This is actually impressive," Greg admitted, reading through the document. "But will it actually happen? Police departments make promises all the time after incidents like this." That's why they want me involved, Michael explained. To help ensure they follow through. Greg looked up from the papers. Are you going to do it? Michael stared into his coffee. I don't know. Part of me wants to put this whole thing behind me. Go back to my normal life. Another part feels like I have a responsibility now. Whatever you decide, you've got support, Greg assured him. A lot of people are standing with you on this. That evening, Michael's phone rang with a call from Anthony Richardson of the state attorney's office. Mr. Davis, I understand Chief Wilkins spoke with you about our investigation. Richardson began. I wanted to personally extend the invitation to serve as a community liaison. I'm still considering it, Michael replied. To be honest, I never saw myself in this kind of role. Few people do, Richardson said. But sometimes circumstances place us in positions we didn't seek. Your case has become a catalyst for potential change, but that change will be more meaningful with your continued involvement. After the call, Michael sat on his porch, watching the sunset. His quiet neighborhood seemed unchanged, yet everything felt different. His phone buzzed continuously with messages of support, interview requests from media outlets, and invitations to speak at community forums. The next morning, Michael took a personal day from work and drove to his parents' home 2 hours away. His father, Robert Davis, had been a civil rights activist in his younger days before becoming a high school principal. If anyone could offer perspective on Michael's dilemma, it would be him. They sat in the backyard garden his mother had carefully tended for 20 years, sipping lemonade and talking through the situation. Dad, I'm not an activist, Michael sighed. I'm a software engineer. I write code. I solve problems with algorithms. I don't know how to reform a police department. His father nodded thoughtfully. You know, when I was about your age, I found myself in a similar position. Not identical, but similar. I was just a young teacher who spoke up at a school board meeting about inequality in our district. Next thing I knew, I was appointed to a committee to address the very issues I'd raised. What did you do? I almost turned it down, his father admitted. I had all the same doubts you're having now. Who was I to take on that responsibility? But then my father, your grandfather, told me something I never forgot. He said, when the door to change opens, someone has to walk through it. Michael let those words sink in. And you walked through it. I did. It wasn't easy. I made mistakes. Some people resented me. Others expected miracles I couldn't deliver. But looking back, it was one of the most meaningful things I've ever done. As evening approached, Michael drove back to Westfield with his father's words echoing in his mind. When he arrived home, he found Diane Lewis waiting on his porch with a folder of papers. Sorry to show up unannounced, she said as he approached. But I thought you should see these. Inside the folder were dozens of letters, handwritten notes from residents of Westfield, many from neighborhoods predominantly populated by minorities. People have been dropping these off at the community center, Diane explained. They're sharing their own experiences with Officer Reynolds and other officers. Some of these incidents go back years. Michael read through several of the letters, stories of harassment, of unnecessary stops, of fear and humiliation. Many of the writers expressed gratitude that someone had finally documented these behaviors on video, that someone with credibility had stood up. They see you as their voice, Diane said quietly. The weight of responsibility settled more firmly on Michael's shoulders. This wasn't just about his experience anymore. It was about a community that had suffered in silence for too long. The next morning, Michael called Chief Wilkins. I've made my decision, he said, when the chief answered. I'll serve as a liaison for the investigation and reform process. But I have conditions. I'm listening, Wilkins replied. First, the Civilian Oversight Board needs to include representatives from all neighborhoods in Westfield, especially those that have been most affected by biased policing. Second, all findings and data from the investigation must be made public. And third, there needs to be a clear timeline for implementing reforms, with concrete benchmarks and consequences if they're not met. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Wilkins said, Those are reasonable conditions, Mr. Davis. I believe we can work with them. Later that day, Michael stood before a group of reporters outside the community center. With Greg, Diane, and Lieutenant Washington beside him, he announced his decision to hell. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in Oakwood Park. The maple trees that had witnessed Michael Davis's humiliation now displayed the golden hues of autumn, their leaves drifting down to cover the spot where Officer Reynolds had thrown his lunch to the ground. Michael sat on the same bench, unwrapping a sandwich from Celia's deli, turkey on sourdough with extra pickles, a small ritual he'd reclaimed for himself. The park had become a symbol, both of injustice and of the change that followed. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked. Michael looked up to see Lieutenant Gloria Washington, now Captain Washington since her promotion 3 months ago. She wore plain clothes instead of her uniform, a folder tucked under her arm. "Please," Michael gestured to the space beside him. "Celebrating with lunch in the park?" Washington sat down with a small smile. "Something like that. I wanted you to be the first to see this." She handed him the folder. "The final report from the state investigation? It's being released to the public tomorrow." Michael set his sandwich aside and opened the folder. The comprehensive document detailed 6 months of intense scrutiny of the Westfield Police Department. It confirmed what many in the community had known for years, a pattern of biased policing that had disproportionately affected minority residents. 94 policy violations, Michael said. Scanning the summary, 17 officers with multiple sustained complaints. "Yes," Washington nodded. 5 have already resigned. 3 others, including Officer Miller, have been terminated. The rest are facing various disciplinary actions. Michael continued reading. "And the reforms? All being implemented," Washington confirmed. "Body cameras are now mandatory and operational. The Civilian Oversight Board has reviewed 27 complaints so far. Training on bias and de-escalation has been completed by 80% of the force." She paused. "It's not perfect, but it's real progress." Michael thought about the journey of the past 6 months. The initial media frenzy had eventually died down, but the work had continued. Weekly meetings, difficult conversations, resistance from the old guard, and gradually incremental changes. He had balanced this unexpected role with his regular job, sometimes working late into the night to keep up with both responsibilities. "What about Reynolds?" Michael asked. The former officer had largely disappeared from public view after his termination. "He moved to another state," Washington replied. "Tried to get hired by 3 different departments, but the news about what happened followed him. Last I heard, he's working security at a warehouse." Michael nodded, feeling no particular satisfaction at this information. The goal had never been to ruin one man's life, but to address the larger issues his actions had exposed. "There's something else," Washington said, turning to a specific page in the report. "The City Council voted unanimously to implement the Davis Protocol." "The what?" Michael looked up in surprise. "The Davis Protocol," Washington repeated. "It's a set of standards for handling bias complaints and preventing similar incidents. They named it after you." Michael was speechless for a moment. When he'd sat on this same bench 6 months ago, just wanting to enjoy his lunch, he could never have imagined having a police protocol named after him. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't need to say anything," Washington replied. "Your actions spoke loudly enough. You could have just taken the settlement they offered and walked away. Instead, you stayed engaged even when it was difficult and uncomfortable." The city had indeed offered Michael a substantial settlement early on, hoping to resolve the matter quickly. He had accepted it only on the condition that the money be used to establish a community foundation focused on improving police-community relations. As they sat together, Officer Tanya Rodriguez jogged past, slowing to wave at them both. The new community liaison officers made regular, friendly patrols through neighborhoods that had previously seen police only during confrontational encounters. It was a small change, but an important one. "Chief Wilkins wanted me to invite you to the graduation ceremony for the new recruits next week," Washington said. "The first class to go through the revised training program. He thought you might want to say a few words." Michael considered this. "I'll be there." After Washington left, Michael remained on the bench finishing his sandwich in the peaceful park. His phone buzzed with a text from Greg Chen. "Meeting still on for tonight?" The community advisory group they had formed continued to meet regularly, monitoring the implementation of reforms and providing feedback to the department. What had begun as a crisis response had evolved into a sustainable community effort. That evening, Michael arrived at the community center to find it buzzing with activity. The advisory group had grown from its original 5 members to nearly 30, representing every neighborhood in Westfield. They had become a respected voice in local governance. Their input sought not just on policing issues but on other community concerns as well. Diane Lewis greeted him at the door. You're just in time. We're reviewing the final draft of the Oversight Board's first quarterly report. Inside, Michael found a diverse group of citizens engaged in thoughtful discussion. Among them was Robert Chen, Greg's father, who had initially been skeptical of the reform effort, but had gradually become one of its strongest supporters. Michael, the elder Chen called out, "Come settle a debate for us. We're discussing whether the new complaint tracking system should be accessible to the public in real time or through regular reports." As Michael joined the conversation, he was struck by how ordinary this all seemed now. 6 months ago, these detailed discussions of police accountability measures would have felt foreign to him. Now they were just part of his regular routine. Later that night, as the meeting concluded, Chief Wilkins arrived. He no longer seemed uncomfortable in this setting, having learned to listen more than he spoke when community members raised concerns. "I've been reviewing applications for the new community outreach officer positions," Wilkins told the group. "I'd appreciate your input on the candidates." This too represented a significant shift. The department that had once made decisions behind closed doors now actively sought community involvement in its operations. After the meeting, Michael and Wilkins walked out together. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Michael said as they reached the parking lot. "That first day after the videos went viral, you acted quickly to fire Reynolds. Faster than anyone expected. Why?" Wilkins was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to say it was just about doing the right thing," he finally answered. "But the truth is more complicated." He leaned against his car. 20 years ago, I was a rookie officer in another city. I witnessed my training officer harass a black teenager for no good reason. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't speak up. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I was too new, that one incident didn't define the department. Michael listened, sensing the weight of this confession. 2 weeks later, that same officer badly beat a man during an arrest. The man suffered permanent injuries. Wilkins shook his head. "I've carried that with me my entire career, wondering if I could have prevented it by speaking up earlier." He met Michael's eyes. "When I saw that video from the park, I recognized the same pattern. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice." As Michael drove home that night, he reflected on how a moment of bigotry and humiliation had sparked a process of genuine change. Not perfect change. There were still problems, still officers who resisted the new approaches, still community members who remained distrustful. But meaningful progress nonetheless. 3 days later, Michael stood before the graduating class of new police officers. 20 fresh faces, more diverse than any previous class in the department's history. They watched him intently as he approached the podium. "When I was asked to speak to you today, I wondered what I could possibly say that would matter," he began. "I'm not a police officer. Until 6 months ago, I had no special insight into law enforcement. I was just a man trying to eat his lunch in a park." A small ripple of recognition moved through the audience. But that ordinary moment became extraordinary because of how power was misused. "It's a lesson I hope you'll carry with you every day of your careers. The badge you'll receive today represents the community's trust in you. That trust is both precious and fragile." Michael looked at the faces before him. Young men and women at the beginning of their careers. Their futures still unwritten. You're entering law enforcement at a challenging time, when old ways are being questioned and new approaches are being developed. Some will tell you to resist these changes. Others will tell you that nothing can ever really change. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I've learned over these past 6 months is that real change happens in the space between idealism and cynicism. It happens through difficult conversations and small daily choices. It happens when good people commit to doing better, even when it's uncomfortable." Chief Wilkins nodded slightly from his seat on the stage. "The incident that brought me into your world was painful and humiliating, but what followed has given me hope. I've seen officers like Captain Washington lead with integrity. I've seen Chief Wilkins make difficult decisions that put principles above politics, and I've seen a community come together to demand better, while also engaging constructively in creating solutions." Michael looked